First, change the hostname and preliminary settings before running dcpromo to set up Active Directory. Okay, we're starting with a pristine installation of 2008 server, and we're just going to do a basic Active Directory setup. And one of the first things you want to do, well, first off, if you want to rename the hostname or do any type of renaming or changing of that, you want to do this before you do dcpromo, because it's going to run DNS and set up A records and things. And so I'm in a workgroup Autobots. My hostname is Optimus Prime. That's fine. I want to leave it that way. If I were going to change that, I would want to do this before I set up Active Directory, because otherwise you'll get stale or old A records and pointer records and SRV records and things like that. So make those changes first, and then of course you're going to want to run dcpromo. You'll need to basically implement the role of directory services. And there's several ways to do that. You could go server manager, you can open the role manager, or you could just type dcpromo. That's pretty much my method. 2. Configure a static IP for your server. Domain controllers, DHCP, and DNS servers should not be on dynamic IP addresses. But even before we do that, remember, every server, any domain controller, or even like a web server, file server, database server, any type of server on the network that performs a vital network function should not really be on DHCP. Alright, it should not have a dynamic IP address. It should have a static IP so that it won't change. And that way it's sort of a stalwart, or it's stable, it's on the network, it's easily findable. Also, we're going to implement the DHCP server role in this after we set up Active Directory, so that our clients, when they want to join the Active Directory domain, they'll be able to lease an IP address from the DHCP server. And because of that, again, we want to make sure that we have a static IP. You don't want to use a dynamic IP for a domain controller, and especially for a DHCP server, which would then itself turn around and be handing out IP addresses and things. That would be a disaster. So first off, let's right click and go to Properties, and we're going to come up with a static IP, and I'm going to use a small class C type network. So I'd want to go to Manage Network Connections, and Local Area Connection, right click, I'm going to go to Properties. And if it were a larger network and we were using IP version 6, that would be fine, but it's not, and we're not, so I'm going to uncheck IP version 6. It'll save us some traffic on the network and maybe give us a little bit more performance. And then I want to highlight IP version 4, which we will be using, and I'm going to select Properties. And instead of it being configured to lease an IP dynamically from a DHCP server, it itself will become a DHCP server, and we need to give it a static IP. Okay, and so I'm going to do 22. Let me put my number lock on there. I'm going to do 222 and 222 and 4, 222, and we'll just make this 1. How about that? All right. So standard class C subnet mask. Don't need a default gateway, but later if we chose to implement routing, we could configure routing and remote access and add another NIC interface and make this a multi-home computer, and then we could utilize gateway services and things. But for now, no, I'm not going to do that. 3. Until you get a DNS hierarchy set up, configure the first domain controller you set up to use itself as a DNS server by entering the loopback address. Now this is important for the DNS server. When you're first setting up Active Directory, odds are you're not going to have a DNS server, because we're starting from scratch, so to speak. So there's no DNS server that we can utilize. Well, in the Active Directory setup process, the server needs to be able to find certain records and things within DNS. So one of the things you can do to make it easier on you in the setup process is configure the loopback. Remember, the loopback is 127.0.0.1, and that way this domain controller will use itself for DNS information during the setup process. And then you could always add an alternate DNS server later, or you could open up the DNS server console and add forwarders. And we've talked about that in other videos. There's 4 or 5 videos out there just with that deal with nothing but DNS. But there are plenty of options there. But in the Active Directory setup process, we want to do this. Make sure we configure the loopback as DNS. So static IPs are good. Make sure your subnetting and your class structure is okay. And we're going to go ahead and configure that to static now. All right, and just take a few minutes. So the I can't even say the word. So the preliminary steps we've taken care of, such as if we wanted to rename the computer, given it a static IP, all those things. We want to take care of that before running Active Directory and using dcpromo. Fourth, now that you have prepared your server with a static IP, run dcpromo.exe to begin the Active Directory setup process. And now we're ready to go. So I'm going to click on Start, and from a command prompt, you can just type dcpromo to bring up the tool, and it'll check and see if the Active Directory domain services binaries are installed. And if not, you'll need to install them. And again, there's several ways to do that. You can implement directory services as a role. I kind of like the dcpromo tool myself, but use advanced mode installation. I'm going to check that option. I'm going to click Next. And in this case, Next. And my host name is Optimus Prime. And Optimus Prime is the leader of the Autobots, so we're going to make the Active Directory domain the Autobots. Now, he was peer-to-peer, or, well, he currently is peer-to-peer, right? So he's in a work group, Autobots, but we want to create an Active Directory domain and go from a peer-to-peer to a client-server architecture. So I want to create a new domain inside of a new forest because none exist yet. And, I mean, there are several options here. I'll go back. I guess I should briefly talk about that. I'm trying to keep this video brief and not waste too much of your time, but just notice the options. If you're doing this from scratch, then obviously there is no existing domain, no existing forest. That's your only option. You couldn't pick this. However, if you were not doing this from scratch, let's say you're just adding a fault-tolerant domain controller, in which case you would say add a domain controller to an existing domain, and that would be maybe for implementing things like fault tolerance. Maybe I wanted to add 3 or 4 domain controllers in the Autobots domain, and that way if the Decepticons attack 1 or 2 of them, we still have 2 domain controllers running, and it gives us some fault tolerance to keep everything running in our Autobots domain. So that would be that example. All right, add a domain controller to an existing domain. Now this one would be create a new domain in an existing forest. So the FQD and fully qualified domain name follows the standard DNS hierarchy structure. In other words, as you move from left to right. So hypothetically, say that my forest name is forest name is Autobots, or my tree name would be Autobots, and my forest name would be Rule. So Autobots.rule. In this example, then I could have another tree name, another domain, start a whole nother tree, and maybe have like I don't know, the Constructicons or somebody, I don't know, whatever other tree I wanted to create. And then notice the option here, I could create a new domain tree root instead of a new child domain. Well, this would be at the same level as my original tree. This would be what we call a subdomain. Alright, so a subdomain would be like I don't know, let's see, area1.autobots.rules or something like that. But the tree structure would move downward. So anyway, just be aware of the different options, but we're doing this from scratch. None of that exists yet, so this is our only option, only valid option we could choose. Create a new domain in a new forest. And there are several other videos I posted. If you're confused about that, go take a look at the Setting Up Active Directory videos, and it talks about the differences between the structures, and there's even like some diagrams and things. So anyway, next, the FQDN fully qualified domain name, I want to do Autobots. And Autobots, and we'll do Autobots.transformers. Alright, and the way this works, this will be the forest, and then this would be the domain tree. Alright, so moving from right to left. Now normally this is going to be like, normally organizations and companies would go like .com or .org or .mil or whatever. And that's so that you can make your Active Directory domain synonymous with or jive with the way DNS works on the web. So you could set up a web server and have a website and have like autobots.com. So that's the normal way you would do it, but I thought we'd have a little fun, try to make it at least somewhat entertaining, an otherwise dry and not necessarily entertaining subject. So to make it more fun, yes, you'd want to use .com or .edu or something like that if you were doing this for an actual organization and you wanted to set up IIS, Internet Information Services, and create a website and things. But we'll just we'll have a little fun and maybe learn something in the process. So Autobots.transformers, and then if I had a subdomain, again, that would go to the left, the way that works. So like sub1.autobots.transformers. So the way it works is here's the forest. Transformers is the forest. Okay. Autobots would be the first tree. So that's the domain root, right? A tree that we've set up in the forest. And then sort of a branch off of that tree, or a subdomain, would be subdomain 1. Okay, and then it too could have a subdomain, and if we called it sub 1. So you could have sub 1, which is a subdomain of sub 1, which is a subdomain of Autobots, the domain tree root, which is in the forest Transformers. I'm moving the cursor, so watch the cursor. And you could have multiple subdomains. Then you could tree off in another direction. You could have sub 2, or sub 2 and sub 2. And why would you do that? Well, it depends. Some people will implement subdomains by location. Now, Microsoft recommends not using a lot of subdomains if you can help it, unless you need it, because it will increase the cost. The TCO, the total cost of ownership, you have to have more domain controllers, and it's more complicated, and just it ends up costing you more to do that. But there might be a legitimate reason. So let's say that we had a subdivision of the Autobots, and they were in North America. This is typically what a lot of organizations might do. Oops, my caps lock was on. Let me turn that off. Alright. So that could be North America or South America or whatever. But you get the idea. So then we might do a different location, maybe continent or maybe by state or city or something like that. But we might do a different location. You kind of get the idea how that would work. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of go over the fully qualified domain name structure so that you kind of understand that. And again, there are plenty of other videos on that, so I don't want to waste your time. So we're going to do autobots.transformers will be our domain name. I'm going to click next. And we'll let the wizard take care of as much of the work for us as possible here. So, be aware that when you set up Active Directory, yes, you go from peer-to-peer to client-server architecture. You leave the NetBIOS workgroup format, but to make things backwards compatible, you will have a domain NetBIOS name. And it's usually the same name as your domain, unless, of course, there are restrictions and limitations, and you can't use as many characters and things with a NetBIOS workgroup type name as you can with an Active Directory domain name. And if that were the case, it might truncate it a little bit or chop off some. But my name was relatively, Autobots is not that long, so in this case, my NetBIOS name will be the same as my Active Directory domain name. And that's good, that's what I want. So next, your forest functional level, 2000 if you need it backwards compatible with 2000 products and possibly NT. Who still uses NT? I doubt anybody today. 2003 if you need it backwards compatible with 2003 type server products and Windows XP Professional, things like that. And then 2008 if you want to use all the cool bells and whistles with 2008 and Windows 7 and Vista. And that's what we want. I'm going to get 2008 because I have nothing to be backwards compatible with. And I'd like to have all the cool features. So that's the highest domain functional level. Now you can change this later. You can go up, but you can't necessarily go back. But in this case, by default, we'll start at 2008. So next. And then, yes, I want to, remember we configured the loopback as the DNS server setting on the client. So I'm going to allow the wizard to, configure and implement the DNS server role for me. And it'll take care of adding like an A record and some important SRV records to specify like, the global catalog server and different things like that. Remember the 5 operations master roles. And if that sounds mysterious to you, there are other videos, but basically, Active Directory implements what are considered operations master rules. It is a multi-master model, but even though it's a multi-master model, domain controllers will hold certain what we call operations master roles. And what that does is it's a way for Active Directory to resolve replication conflicts. If there were not, even though it's multi-master and it can survive, several domain controllers going down, and Active Directory will still be up as long as one domain controller is left standing. There are some roles that are specific to a certain domain controller, and 2 domain controllers couldn't use those roles. For instance, like the RID master, you have to keep SIDs unique throughout an Active Directory network. So the RID master needs to be designated on one machine, and it hands out banks of 100 SIDs, and that ensures that all throughout the network, if you had more than one RID master, that would be a disaster because potentially you'd get duplicate SIDs. The domain naming master is another example. That operations master rule. You can't have more than one domain naming master because there needs to be a final authority so that no 2 subdomains or Active Directory domains have the same name. They must be unique. The PDC emulator role for timekeeping in the replication process and backwards compatibility. So there, the schema master, again, when you modify the schema, that's the skeleton or the Active Directory structure. So there are certain reasons why, even in a multi-master model like Active Directory, you have to designate an operations master role. And I'm just kind of hashing this up or reviewing this. So anyway, let's go ahead and go next. And I guess I'm just talking. So there are other videos. Yes, I want to continue. Please watch those. If I'm trying to make this a very brief video on setting up Active Directory, unlike my excessively long ones. Okay, so NTDS, that's the Active Directory database files, ntds.dit. We're going to go with the defaults, and the sysvol folder is a share that it'll create to allow the propagation of group policy. And there are many videos on group policy, so again, I'm trying to make this brief, so I won't go into that now. But if you're curious, that's one of the great things about Active Directory. One of the things you would utilize with Active Directory is group policy. And that takes place through replication, and those group policies are in these sysvol shares that are being created. So next, now I need to set up my domain password, and password complexity is turned on by default. And remember that's a combination, 3 of these 4 categories: uppercase, lowercase, symbols, and numbers. So at least 3 of those. And so I'm going to do P @ SSW0, capital P @ SSW0 RD. That way I've used all 4. And that would be considered a complex password, but easy to remember because in a way it's still a password. Capital P @ lowercase SSW0 lowercase R and D. Alright, so remember to meet your pass. Now, I have lots of tutorials talking about configuring group policy, how to turn off password complexity and modify things in the default domain controllers policy and the default domain policy and things like that. But again, we'll save that for another video so we can be brief. So just be aware that the first time you set it up, yes, password complexity is turned on. You haven't disabled it yet, and therefore you don't want to use a simple password like just PASS or something. It needs to be 3 out of 4 of these categories: uppercase, lowercase, symbols, and numbers. And that would be considered more difficult to brute force or dictionary. Alright, so next I'm going to go with the default next. And I'm going to check this option here, reboot on completion, so it'll automatically reboot. Okay, and now the setup process is complete, so we're rebooting. Now, when we do, we're going to lose the log on locally ability, and we're only going to be able to log into the domain. Alright, so that means the local SAM, Security Account Manager, and local users and groups won't be used. Okay, now we're rebooting. So, since the local users and groups won't be used and the local SAM isn't going to be used, instead, what we do now in a domain is we use Active Directory users and computers. And Active Directory users and computers can be used to create users and groups and configure things. And you'll notice you have a great deal more options in Active Directory than you did when it was just a standalone server. That is, in the pristine condition when you just installed 2008. Okay, and it's applying the computer settings. Notice that your local logon has vanished. Instead, you may only log into the Active Directory domain on a 2008 server once you have set up Active Directory. Alright, and now I can log on. And when I do, notice that I no longer log on locally or have that ability, but now I log into the domain. So the Autobots domain, I'm going to log in. And also, when you log in locally, your desktop and the users folder, it caches and creates different desktops every time you create a user account. Well, local login accounts that use the SamHive are different from domain Active Directory accounts. So just be aware of that. And just go here. Note. Also take notice that a new Active Directory domain desktop folder and login has been created that is different from your previous local desktop folder and login. You will also no longer be able to use local users and groups to manage users and groups. Instead, you must now use Active Directory users and computers. Give my slow computer a chance to catch up. But again, if I go here and into users, and notice these are different domains here. So there I have administrator where I've logged in locally, and then administrator Galactica, and so forth. Okay. And then let's look at information about our computer. So if we were, notice our domain is now autobots.transformers, and our computer name is Optimus Prime, and the same thing if we were to go here, and notice it tells me domain controllers cannot be moved from one domain to another, yada yada yada. In this case, you notice I don't have the option of swapping back and forth between workgroup and domain. You wouldn't want to do that, especially with a domain controller is a vital component on the network. So it needs a static IP address, and you never would want to do that. So that's when you run dcpromo, it will disable that ability. And the only way I could go back to a workgroup, I'd have to run dcpromo again and demode. So that's actually a good thing. So I'm all set. Active Directory is set up, and now a lot of times the next thing you probably want to do is set up a DHCP server role so that clients can lease IP addresses. And also DHCP works with things like network access protection and DNS and dynamic updates and secure dynamic update. There's so many things in Active Directory that complement and work with the DHCP and DNS server roles. So you'll pretty much want to configure those as well. Now, the wizard dcpromo configured the DNS server role for us. So that's there, but we want to implement or set up DHCP. And just to take a gander at it, let me take this and I'll copy it to the desktop. Typically, these are DNS, DHCP, group policy. These are some common things that I would add, to a computer. 5. Verify your DNS server settings. You should now have an appropriate A record for your server and SRV records for things like Global Catalog, LDAP, and Kerberos. In addition, the sysvol share should automatically be available on your new domain controller for replication and group policy propagation. And group policy is huge too, and snap-ins, and certificates and all, but we won't go into that today. We'll keep it brief. There are plenty of videos posted just on that topic, and so as you have the time, you can go through those if you want. But again, I promised I try to keep it brief without going off on tangents, which is my nature. So, all right. So notice I have an A record there for Optimus Prime, and he's the chief domain controller. He now holds the 5 operations master roles. So remember, that's like PDC emulator and schema master and infrastructure master and domain naming master and RID master. Alright, so he holds all 5 of those operations master roles because right now he's the only domain controller in the entire domain. But later we could add other domain controllers. Be aware that the wizard, went and added SRV records. He's the only global catalog server, so he's a global catalog, Kerberos version 5 for replication, password for access tokens, and lightweight directory access protocol, or LDAP server. Alright, so he holds all those roles and positions. If you do not have an authorized Active Directory DHCP server already set up on your network, you need to set up one now. So DNS has been set up, but we still need to implement DHCP for a basic Active Directory setup here. And there's several ways to get at it, but in this case I'll just use Server Manager. We just need to add that role. And we'll get Optimus up and running as the domain controller and leader of the Autobots domain. So I'm going to go to roles. And when you first open Server Manager, it'll collect data about the current status of the system and what roles are operational, what roles are not. That can take some time, especially on a slow computer like mine, but when this disappears, the hourglass collecting data, then we could do things like add roles, remove roles, whatever it is we need to do. Okay, and now we're ready to add a role. So I'm going to click on Add Roles. I'm going to go over here and select Server Roles, and notice you can click all these checkboxes. Now the grayed out ones are the ones that are set up. Active Directory domain services are installed because we ran dcpromo, and DNS, the wizard configured that for us. The ones in bold are ones we can add, and we need to implement or add the DHCP server role, so I'll click that. And when you do, it will conveniently launch a setup wizard. Now you could just close out and manually configure a scope and authorize and activate your scope and authorize your DHCP server later if you wanted to, but why not let the wizard walk us through it? So next, this is the static IP that I want to serve out the DHCP addresses on, and in this case that's right. Just make sure that that's right. If you have more than one network interface in your multi-home, make sure it's the right IP address connected to the right subnet. And remember that that will be the one that it responds to the four-step DHCP handshake process, where you boot up a client, it goes to releases a DHCP discover broadcast, and then a DHCP server, if it's going through an RFC 1542 compliant router, it'll hear that DHCP discover broadcast and it'll respond, and then the DHCP response, and then DHCP offer and DHCP acknowledgement. So that four-step handshake process. I'm going to click on next and make sure that parent domain is right, Autobots, transformers, go with the defaults, address is good, DNS, because we're using, this is our first server, first DNS server and everything, so that looks good. Next. Wins only if you need to be backwards compatible, and we don't, no old stuff that uses wins. Most modern Active Directory networks do not implement wins, they just do DNS. We need at least one scope, so I'm going to click on scope, and the scope name can be anything we like. We'll call it Autobots Transform, if I could spell. Autobots Transform. And we just want to make sure that we don't create an IP conflict. So remember that I'm 222.222.222.1, so I wouldn't want to start at 222.222.222.1, because if I lease that IP out to somebody, then I'd create an IP conflict, and that could kick both me and them off the network, or make things perform very bad. So I want to make sure that I start giving out IPs beyond the range of where my static IPs are. On a small network, I usually reserve the first 10 IP addresses for static IPs for servers, which means I would start a scope at 11 in a Class C network. Remember, Class C, the valid addresses in a non-subnetted Class C would go from 1 all the way to 254 in the last octet or last byte. So if I did that, then that means I'd go over here and I could end it at 254, be the last valid IP, and then that gives me addresses 1 through 10 to configure servers with that need static IPs, and I can be sure that way that we don't create IP conflicts, that there's no overlap between the DHCP scope and the static IPs. Want to be aware of that. A non-subnetted normal Class C mask, remember, is 255.255.255.0, and the gateway, I can configure that option later, but right now I'll just make the server the gateway. 222.222.222.1 is the server. And later on we might multi-home it, set up forwarding on the DNS server, and maybe routing and remote access and route traffic to some other location that way. So we're all set, our scope set. I'll let it activate the scope for me. Optionally, you could choose to do it later for whatever reason. Next. Enable DHCP version stateless mode or not. In this case, no, we're not using DHCP version 6, so I'm going to skip that, disable it. Next. The user credentials. In this case, if you're logged in as administrator and Autobots, you're fine. If you're not, if you're logged in as somebody that's not administrator, then you might want to use the administrator, the enterprise admin or the Active Directory administrator account as your credentials. Otherwise, you might have permissions issues and things. And of course, if you skip authorization, you'll have to do it later. You'll know that you're authorized or not. If you see a green arrow, you're authorized, DHCP is running. If you don't, you see a red arrow, then it's not. But we want to authorize it in the wizard, and we want to supply the administrator credentials, and click next. And now install. Notice I'll give you a little summary page there, just showing you what your scope and your settings were, so you can kind of verify it before you implement or set up DHCP. Alright, and installation succeeded. No error messages or anything. We have a warning message that I've disabled automatic updating, but that's because I didn't want it to interfere with anything, and I usually do that anyway. I don't go for automatic updating unless I'm implementing like a WSUS server for software update services. So I'm going to click on close, and we're all set there. And again, I'm just going to make another shortcut. So typically, In the first stages of Active Directory setup, you may get a lot more intricate and complex as you begin to configure it and do special things with it, but typically from scratch, when you set up Active Directory, run dcpromo, you're going to do that and set up DNS and then DHCP. That's sort of a bare bones, from scratch, foundation of Active Directory. So the server's sitting there, the domain exists, now it can be joined, or workstations can be joined to it, and now there's a DHCP server to respond to client requests for IPs and help them find the domain controller and the Autobots domain. And if we were to open it and look at it, the DHCP, just to show you what I'm talking about real quick, let me go here and pull this out and open this, and notice there's the green arrow because it's authorized, and if I were to right click here, see how it says unauthorized? If it weren't authorized, I would say authorized instead of unauthorized, but it is. And if that were red, we'd have a problem, but it's not. Also, the only other thing is you just make sure your scope is activated. So your DHCP server needs to be authorized and it needs to be activated, and if I right click on this, it says deactivate, not activate, so I know that I'm already activated. The authorization process is an Active Directory security measure to cut down on a hacker's ability to implement or set up a rogue DHCP server in your organization. So hypothetically, say that Megatron or one of the Decepticons comes in with a laptop and they want to set up a rogue DHCP server and hand out bad IP addresses, or implement some kind of Autobot in the middle attack. Man in the middle attack. Autobot. Excuse me, Decepticon in the middle attack. What am I saying? Well, I guess Autobot if they think it's an Autobot, and that's metaphysical. If you're fooling some. Well, anyway, whatever. So man in the middle attack, Autobot, Decepticon in the middle attack. But if that were the case, again, they could, if they could set up a rogue DHCP server, then they could do that. But the neat thing is, this particular feature of Active Directory, it only allows a DHCP server to function when it's been authorized with the appropriate or proper administrative credentials. So that's kind of a neat security measure, and a lot of other things that we'll take a look at in other videos that Microsoft implements in their version of DHCP, such as the capabilities of dynamic updates, secure dynamic update. There's just a whole lot of, a slew of features and things. If I chose to manage authorized servers. So those are some really cool capabilities built right in. So now that we have Active Directory set up and it's there and it's waiting, let's, the last step of the process, let's join a Windows 7 workstation into our 2008 Active Directory domain. So Optimus Prime is the leader of the Autobots. We have the Autobots domain. It's sitting there waiting. Now Bumblebee's been on Earth protecting Sam. Now he needs to meet up with the Autobots and join the Autobots domain and meet up with Optimus Prime. So we're going to do that.